Hi, Member Pearson. We're going to get started in just a moment. You will see that we are streaming live now, but we won't actually get started until we're going to give a few more minutes here.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, Sean, I think we're going to get going at this point. Just a reminder before we get started that virtual members to unmute and turn on cameras when voting. We're going to call this meeting to order at 9:11 a.m. Director Ross, please do the roll call.
Member Chapman?
Here.
Member Clark? Member Crace?
Here.
Member Glass?
Here.
Dr. Hagerman? Member Jefferson? Member Kaufman?
Here.
Member Kravickas?
Here.
Dr. Moix is not with us. Member Murphy?
Here.
Member Pearson?
Here.
Dr. Spencer?
Here.
Member Taylor? Dr. Testa is not with us today. Member Tiffany?
Here.
Dr. Hagerman, you have a quorum?
All right. Before we begin, Director Ross, will you please provide a brief overview of the meeting for the subcommittee members?
Thank you, Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee. So during today's meeting, item 2 will have subcommittee members vote on the tabled items from the May meeting, minus the items brought forward by Member Glass. Between the May and June meetings, board staff gathered feedback on these items via a survey and worked with Rory and subcommittee leadership to refine the language of those items. Once those items have been voted on, the subcommittee will then move to item 3 on the agenda, where it will vote for items put forward by Member Glass. Member Glass will take a brief amount of time to explain her items and to answer questions, and then voting will occur. So the items 2 and 3 in this meeting will be voting items. After that, the subcommittee will finish its discussion it began in the May meeting about independent educational evaluations. This discussion will result in the generation of recommendations. And then what will happen is, as you all build those recommendations, as you put forward those recommendations, Rory and I will record them. We'll take a break at a certain point and we'll record them, refine them, kind of run them through leadership, and then bring them back to the subcommittee for a vote. Upon the completion of that vote, board staff will gather all of the approved recommendations from the course of the subcommittee's meetings And then in the August state board meeting, we'll present those recommendations to the board for voting for potential approval. If approved, staff will then begin the process of moving those recommendations forward. As an example, working with our colleagues at ADE on recommended guidance, opening rulemaking packages. There's very specific law on how rulemaking packages have to be developed, and then meeting with legislators about legislative recommendations. So this meeting will wrap up the work of the Special Education Evaluation Subcommittee, and it will move to the board at the next board meeting. The reason it's not going forward to the board in July is because the board does not actually have a July board meeting, which I'm very thankful for right now. And so we'll be moving forward in August.
All right. So now we will move on to item 2, which involves presentations, discussion, and possible actions to approve the subcommittee recommendations to the state board regarding special education evaluations and special education funding for preschool students, which were tabled from the May meeting. Subcommittee members were sent an electronic version of the document, which with the items. You also have a hard copy in front of you to reference. We will take votes individually. Since the recommendations were crafted over several meetings and refined via direct survey, we will limit discussions to a maximum of 2 to 3 comments, brief comments per item during the voting to ensure a more efficient process. We will now vote on all F, G, and H items on the recommendation spreadsheet, which you have in front of you. Let's begin with item F1. So it's the model recommendation. Should I read F1?
Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee, yes. So we would read each item before it's voted upon. And actually, just as a quick note about this item, in the survey, we did receive a couple of pieces of feedback that were sort of very in detail on this. And so if you'll see the note, the recommendations stayed a little bit broader, but if the recommendation were to pass, we would share all that feedback with the department for the development of this item.
All right. So should I do the motion and then read it?
Yes.
Process-wise. As always, Sean, you know I'm going to be looking for process questions as we go. So do I have a motion to adopt the recommendation F1 as written?
I move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then if there's any feedback, we'll go from there. The Special Education Evaluation Subcommittee recommends that ADE create and make available to the field a model form that schools can use to provide to parents when the IEP team, including the parent and other qualified professionals as appropriate, agree that no additional data are needed to determine whether the child continues to be eligible for special education services. Is there any discussion on this before we vote? Seeing none. So Sean, can we do a roll call?
Dr. Hagerman and members of the subcommittee, it's my recommendation that we do a roll call vote for each item. And my amazing staff is going to help me. Shannonette is going to help me keep track. So member Chapman.
Aye.
Member Clark is absent. Member Crace.
Aye.
Member Glass.
Aye.
Aye.
Member Kaufman.
Aye.
Member Krivicus. Member Murphy.
Aye.
Member Pearson.
Aye.
Dr. Spencer.
Aye.
Member Tiffany.
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman, the motion passes.
All right. And so now we'll go to the second item. And let me read it before I do the motion. I think as it seems to happen with me always, we get into a process later on as we go that works out better. So basically the change for this item is to move from school days to calendar days. So the revised rule would be if parents request an evaluation, the PEA must, within a reasonable amount of time, not to exceed 15 calendar days from the date it receives a parent's request for evaluation, either begin the evaluation by reviewing data or provide a prior written notice refusing to conduct the requested evaluation. Do I have a motion to approve?
Moved. So moved. or whatever.
Yeah, that's bravo. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Is there any discussion before we do the roll call?
I'd just like to make a brief comment.
All right. And then Carla.
I do plan on voting no on this, but the colleagues that I've spoken with are very much in support of, responding to parents in a timely manner. But when it comes to specifying the timeline, the 15 school days has been a really important shift in our field for those of us who are practicing and before the change was made, and our ability to provide high quality evaluations and services to families. So I want to express support for the families who might find that frustrating, but my colleagues feel pretty strongly this is important to the high quality evaluations we strive to provide.
Thank you. And Member Kavickas.
I kind of almost want to explain my vote. Obviously the next step will be at the board. We'll have lots more time if should this pass and move to the board. We'll have more time to rehash it, but I would love for us in the field to find another option. It feels like it's an either or, a one or nothing. And I feel like there's got to be more innovative ways that we can approach. Because I heard really great examples on both ends of this, the part where the schools struggle with maybe a parent that doesn't bring students in or the family who's ready to expedite. And I feel like we have to be able to come up with a more creative solution that provides schools the flexibility to address all of those, to provide very fast and expedited ones for the families who are in diagnoses that are ready, but yet not hold schools accountable or penalize them for the other situation. So I just wanted to express a little bit of frustration.
Thank you. With that, let's do the roll call vote. Oh, Marcia.
I appreciate your comments, Member Kravickas. I think a lot of folks in my profession would like to move more quickly. And I would just possibly ask for consideration of support of workforce issues and support of the professionals, that if our caseloads were a little smaller, we would probably be able and be very happy to provide shorter timelines and turnaround for parents. So I do think there are some bigger issues that need to be addressed that would be a really wonderful way for us to come together. And I think we all want to end up in the same place despite some current barriers.
Thank you. All right. Director Ross.
So we'll be taking a roll call vote for item G1. Member Chapman,
No.
Member Crace,
No.
Member Glass,
Aye.
No.
Member Kaufman,
No.
Member Kravickas, Member Murphy,
Aye.
Member Pearson,
No.
Dr. Spencer,
No.
Member Tiffany,
Yes.
Dr. Hagerman, the motion does not pass.
All right. Let's keep track of where I'm going here. And the next one, are we at G2R 7-2401E4?
That is correct. And for process, Dr. Hagerman, you actually can just read what is in red, which is
Okay.
what would be added to the rule.
I appreciate that. Anytime I can read less, I will take that option. All right, so let me read. Upon completion of the review of data meeting, if the determination is made that additional data is needed, the PEA must request parent consent and provide a prior written notice within 5 days. And B, the consent form and prior written notice may also be provided in the review of data meeting after the determination has been made at the additional data as needed or are needed. Is there any discussion? Oh, I guess, do we have a motion to approve?
I motion.
And do we have a second?
I can second.
All right. Is there any discussion before we vote? All right. Come on. We'll take one moment. No worries. Trust me. As someone that drives up from FEMA, I know that feeling. I know the US 60 problem is real. All right. Do we take a moment just to kind of? Okay.
Yes, Dr. Hagerman, I think Member Kaufman is getting Member Taylor caught up there.
All right. So we'll take 1 second. And that's right. Good neighbor pause. Is it okay? We go ahead and vote. All right. Director. Member Glass, go for it. Yes.
Sorry, I just want to ask, so we're voting on G2, but G2 and G3 are both proposing adding different language to the same rule. So is it, you can only vote for one or the other, or how does this one work?
I think they stack.
Dr. Hagerman, member Glass, thank you for the question. The additions from G2 and G3 do not contradict in any way. So
Okay.
they could be both approved, one approved, both denied.
Yeah.
Okay, thank
So-
you.
Thank you for your question.
And how I see it is that the first one talks about that process between that meeting and when the approval, and the other one relates to communication of how does a parent make a request. And so if you had
Okay.
both of them, now we have clarity between the meetings and you have the additional clarification about the
Okay.
present.
So they would just be re-lettered.
Yeah.
Because right now there's two A's, so it would be ABC if they both were to pass or something. Okay.
Member Glass, yeah, we would reformat for the actual rule just for ease of
Sure.
this document. We
Thank
made
you.
sure to stay to. I'm also a former English teacher, so
Thank you. I
stay
appreciate
down
it.
like for.
Can I say though that, G3, you could, and I have no bias here, I'm just explaining, like if you voted no on G2 and let's see, G2 didn't pass, but G3 did, then you still could publish whatever your procedures are, even if there's not a new procedure. So they don't contradict one another. But if there is a new procedure, when a district put that on their website, they need to include the new procedure.
Thank you. All right, Director Ross.
So again, we are taking a roll call vote on item G2. Member Chapman,
No.
member Kreis,
Yes.
member Glass,
Yes.
Dr. Hagerman,
Yes.
member Kaufman,
No.
member Krivickas,
Yes.
member Murphy,
Yes.
member Pearson,
Yes.
Dr. Spencer,
Yes.
member Tiffany,
Yes.
Oh,
member Taylor.
No.
Dr. Hagerman, the motion passes 8-3.
all right. Now we go to G3. This one states that each PEA must publish and make available to parents on its websites its procedures related to requesting an evaluation for special education, including the PEA points of contact for efficient communication. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Member Glass. And do I have a second?
Second.
Member Kavickas, is there any discussion before we do the roll call?
Maybe I was one question. When it says that we have to make available our procedures, I'm just not clear of like how detailed procedures, and like when you said, well, if we change that, then and then I wasn't thinking like the procedure is you contact your school,
Yeah.
you contact the psychologist.
How far down the
email
road
the
do you have to
director.
get?
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like I just wasn't clear on how detailed of procedures was.
I guess you can talk. I can tell you my version of what I would think. My thinking is just how does a parent go from I want to make this request to connecting and making that because what does a formal request mean? I've expressing this of concern. At what point has it become like a formal request? And so enough to get you to hand off to the school. Does that, Rory, in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would encourage you all to think about the purpose of it. And the purpose of it is to just provide information to a parent so that they know how to get help for their kid, right? And I'm going to suggest as both as a professional, but I'll put my parent hat on. Like, I don't want to read a 17-page procedure manual. I just want you to tell me, right? Like, first call this person, then do this, then do that. I mean, I don't think you're prescribing any requirement from this. Like if the board approve, let's say you approve it and the board approves it, I don't think you're prescribing how a district handles that. I would suggest at the board meeting, should you get to that point, and I know that Member Kravickas will have my back here, think about the purpose of this, right? The purpose is just clear, easy communication to parents.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's your procedures manual, although I suppose there's nothing that would stop a district from doing that. I just don't think it'd be that constructive.
But I share I would, as a parent and as a person, I would not want to see the entire special ed handbook there, just enough to get the parent to the point where they can figure out how to make this request. Yeah. Is there any other discussion points before we do the roll call? Seeing none, Director Ross.
We will now take a roll call vote on item G3. Member Chapman,
Aye.
Member Crace,
Aye.
Member Glass,
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman,
Yes.
Member Kaufman,
Aye.
Member Krivickas,
Aye.
Member Murphy,
Aye.
Member Pearson,
Aye.
Dr. Spencer,
Aye.
Member Taylor,
Yes.
Member Tiffany,
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman, the motion passes.
All right, now we go to G4. And this one states, upon completion of an administration of an evaluation, other evaluation measures, and the evaluation report, if the parent requests it, the school shall provide a copy of the evaluation report to a parent at least 5 days before the MET team meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
Can I just clarify really quick?
Sure.
So we are voting either for this or for the second option or for neither, but we cannot vote yes on both.
And if I think the clarifying what I heard is if by somehow we end up with two yes majorities, whatever had the bigger majority would be the way to go. But in a perfect world, it would be one or the other, or neither. I think if this as of
That is correct, Dr. Hagerman. What we have requested is that members vote yes on either G4 or G5, or sorry, excuse me, vote yes on one or vote no on both. They have that right. If again, if for some reason both were to receive a majority of votes, the one with the most votes would prevail.
Just procedurally, Sean, you could vote yes on both, right? Like if they're two separate motions, let's just say you vote on the first one and you use your yes vote, you're not prohibited from using your yes vote on the next one, right?
Procedurally, no.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could vote yes on the first one. And let's just say, I won't speculate, but if I were speculating, like, let's just say that 4 people, don't know, 4 versus 6, no, now 7, vote yes on the first one and the first doesn't pass. Then you get to the next one. If you're one of the 4 who voted yes on the first one, you could vote yes again, right? So you don't have to choose one or the other. And let's just say that the second one passed, yeah.
That is true.
Or flip it and I don't know, 7 people voted yes on the first one, but 9 people voted yes on the second one, then the first one would go away and you'd have the requirement that parents give some 10 days notice. Does that make sense? So I don't think you're prohibited from voting yes on both. Because I understood and
but-
appreciated the question that
Yeah.
Member Glass asked ahead of time procedurally, which is like, I'd rather have something than nothing. So like,
Yeah,
do I?
exactly. And ultimately we need to end up with one or the other or none. We can't have 2 going forward that are like selling different variations of the same thing.
That is correct.
All right. So I think I read it. Do I have a motion to approve? Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second? All right. So we have Member Glass and Member Kavickas. Is there any a Member Murphy?
I just had a thought on the 2 different versions. With Member Crace's concern about do we have time to respond once a parent has asked us, that sort of thing. If a parent asks and there's not enough time, then that becomes problematic. In between the meetings, I saw that in Maryland, there's a statute where it's automatic, that it's 5 business days before the meeting, it's required to be provided, as opposed to taking out that parent request element, which I think is where we're getting the 2 different versions. Like the parent requests it, but they requested it 4 days before the meeting. We can't get it to them before the meeting. We got to move the meeting, and then that becomes problematic. If it's automatic, that's just something to consider. I'm not sure if that's something that gets considered, as we recommend it to the board or what have you. But that was just in terms of the two differences. If it was just sort of part of the procedure that it happens and then you move forward, just that every school is giving that information to the parent before the meeting, so the parent is not waiting to request it and that sort of thing. So.
Member Kavickas?
You just said it exactly what I was thinking, but didn't know how to say
Can
it.
you turn your mic on?
I'm sorry.
I'm just okay.
he just summarized what I was thinking, but I didn't even know that was what I was thinking. I almost feel like both of them are adding another step. Like most parents, especially if it's like your first one, your second one, don't even know they want it. And oh crap, it's 10 days before I got to remember. Whereas when they're doing the consent and the one that we just added, the review of data, the consent, like that same form, do you want a copy ahead of time? So everybody knows, instead of like another deadline, another timeline, another thing that people have to remember, can't we just ask them on that first day, hey, do you want a copy ahead of time? And we can decide what those days are, but it just feels like we're adding a whole nother thing in there that everybody has to try to remember.
Member Chapman.
My concern with this timeline is that the evaluation report may not be done. And also therefore it shortens up the 60-day timeline as well. You have we're getting into all these timelines where everything has to be done. So that is my concern.
I guess to state my version of that is at one level, I want to have the eval process go as fast as possible. And if we add these kinds of things, it might extend out, because now if we're trying to get the meeting as fast as possible, but now we have to create paperwork that we have to make sure we get out by a certain point. So I'm at two. I've kind of one of those things. If we have like a locked in thing, we might create moments where we extend processes when we want to move faster. Member Crace.
Yeah, the other thing I would just say with this is I think that we should relook at the use of the term school days here, because once we sign consent, it is a calendar day timeline. It is not a school day timeline. So if we're saying that 10 school days before the date, this end of the 60 days, that could truly be 15 days. That could be 20 days if there's a break. And so the school days and calendar, those two don't align with the processes.
All right. Rory, any last, as we try to come up with something clear to be voting on?
I mean, I think you have some choices here, right? Well, I'll just start with what's written. My recommendation, a good point about school versus calendar. That's not the recommendation. That's just an observation. I think you could amend this to say at least 5 calendar days before it would be provided, right? Because that would be alignment with the process. Because I take your point exactly. But like if it's school days, that could be 15 days before you actually have the meeting. And I don't think that was the intent of the committee, right? Didn't you all intend kind of 5 days before the meeting? Yeah, I mean,
No.
okay. If you intended 5 days before the meeting, then you could amend this recommendation to say 5 calendar days before, right? And you could amend it to say, if the parent requested at least 10 calendar days before, because otherwise the parent might have to request it 25 days in advance or something ridiculous if there was a break, right? And I think that might get confusing for parents to try to track school days versus calendar days. We all just think in like calendar days. That's one thing. The other thing, I guess, to the recommendation or, issue that Member Murphy and Member Kravickas were bringing forward, I suppose you could have a different motion that you could vote on separately from these, and perhaps first is something like this, and I'm reading the red, but I'm going to add new words. Upon completion of the administration of assessments, other evaluation measures in the evaluation report, then you don't have this piece about if their parent requested. You could just say parents will be provided with a copy of the report. And that gets to that place that if you approve that and the board approved it, you just routinize giving parents a copy of the report 5 days in advance, and that would just be standard. Now, you'll have to look to your school psychologist representative to know, is that, feasible to give everybody a copy? I'm not going to weigh in on that, but you could go that direction, which would be the most inclusive and would remove that barrier of the parent having to flag it, the district having to pay attention to who requested it and who didn't request it. It would just be routinized. If you went that direction and it went to the board, you might think about the timeliness of when that requirement started so that you gave some implementation runway to districts to be able to achieve that with success. Like maybe that's a requirement that doesn't go into effect, for a year. Like then districts could start moving in that direction, but they wouldn't be penalized if they weren't perfectly, compliant with that at the start. Because that's going to, if it were to pass by the board and be implemented by districts, that'll take a little time to train school psychologists to do that, to manage caseloads, do those kinds of things. So I'm just kind of giving you the parameters, but I'd advise you perhaps if you want to think about that as a new recommendation, to have a little discussion, including from your district representatives as to feasibility for that. There's some input from me.
Member Kavickas and then Member Price. And then I want to have, Member Kavickas and then Member Pearson.
I'm operating under the premise, which I'm pretty sure is good legally. Whatever we forward to the board still has the opportunity to take more public testimony. And I mean, we're not, so there's the idea of just forwarding it to the board of saying, yeah, we are making a clear stance that we want to somehow routinize this process. We still have plenty of time to debate how and what the timeline might be. Because that's how I'm approaching these votes. So I want to forward the idea, the issue to the board. And then again, we have an opportunity to get public feedback, which we really haven't yet either at the board meeting.
Member Pearson, sorry about that.
Oh, you're totally fine. So I don't think the issue is a desire to not give parents copies of draft reports before we head into MET meetings. I think the concern is that we would be shortening timelines for school psychologists to be able to complete reports. The sending a parent a copy of the report is pretty loosey-goosey in that definition, because are we saying we want to send standardized scores? Do we want the full explanation and analysis? Like, how much of that report needs to go home during that period of time? Because if we're going to put this in a rule, we're going to be held accountable to whether or not we're implementing it correctly. And, if there's a parent that says, you didn't include this analysis of this particular assessment, that also puts ADE and dispute resolution in this kind of funky place of not being able to say, yes, you're out of compliance, or no, you're not, because there isn't really any kind of criteria of what is supposed to go home. I do think from the school perspective, and again, also from a parent perspective, we do want people to have that information before they're heading into meetings. We don't want that to be a surprise. We don't want that to happen, but there's got to be, I don't know if it's, some kind of guidance document from ADE, or something like that, or just, if a parent requests it, you send them home what you've got done. I don't know of a clean way to make that happen. The other thing is with the parent has to request 10 days, then we've got before, and, we've got 5 days, and it goes to that, who's keeping track and that kind of thing. And I also don't think it's a fair burden to put on parents that, like, you need to know, oh, today's day 50, so I better make sure that I, request a copy of that evaluation. The other piece is that we've got some sites that are doing assessments right up until the day before. And so again, if they're modifying and adjusting their draft report even up until the day before or the morning before, and we've sent something home previously, then we're having to go back through with parents to be like, oh, okay, well, here's where I made changes here, and this is where I made changes there, which I think may create more confusion and more problems and create a bigger problem than the one we're trying to solve. So all of that to say, I don't think anybody is opposed to making sure parents have draft copies, but the language in this is really vague and puts school districts, and again, I think ADE, in a position of like, how do we enforce this, and how do we make sure everybody's including the information that needs to be included?
I think Rory had some feedback too, so go forward.
Yeah, Member Pearson, it's a really good point about the vagueness of the evaluation report and what that includes. I'll say that your current options under G4 and G5, yes, I feel like who sank my battleship when I'm using these numbers, by the way. So under G4 and G5, those both just say evaluation report and don't provide that specification either. So my recommendation to the committee, these things always get better the more you look at them, right? Is that if you pass one of those, then I think you should make a new motion that AD develop technical assistance to provide support to the field to understand what should be included in the information that's provided to parents, so that there is some standardization and clarity, to Member Pearson's point, Member Pearson's point, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of variability. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sean, any thoughts about process now?
Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee, I think the first piece that needs to be amended would be a vote to change school to calendar,
Okay.
because that has to happen.
Was it member Glass and Murphy? I forget, or Kavickas? Who were the two people? Member Glass, are you interested in amending your motion?
Yes, I will amend my motion to instead be amending this proposed rule change to use calendar days instead of school days.
Are you okay with, then, so we have an amended first and an amended second? And then go ahead and vote at that point?
Yes. So we'll do that part first. So this is for G4, changing school days to calendar days.
Want me to read the whole thing again?
So sorry, just for members of the subcommittee, we're just taking this in steps. So that this doesn't the end of potential amendments to this. It's just this is the one that has to happen. So we're going to do this one first.
So, and just be specific, we're voting on changing school to calendar days, but not the whole thing yet?
Right. This is the first change we're voting on.
Okay.
Is this on, would this procedurally go for G4 and G5, or we're just doing G4? I don't know how you.
We'll have to do a second vote for G5.
Yeah.
I don't believe we need a roll call vote for this,
Okay.
Dr.
Are we
Hagerman?
all okay with changing school days to calendar days? That all in favor?
Aye.
Or,
I would oppose.
okay, I'll oppose. Thank you, Member Chapman.
So Dr. Hagerman, the motion passes for G4. Let's move to G5, change to calendar, or
All right.
vote to change to calendar, and then go back to G4.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to change on G5 school to calendar days. Do I have someone to make that motion?
And just to clarify, it's in there twice. So in both instances.
So anywhere it says
Okay.
school days moves to calendar days. Member Glass is the first. Do I have a second?
Well, just
Process wise.
anything in the red that changes, because we just voted on the school days one, just so,
Okay.
just so it's clear. I didn't want it to be, inadvertently changing what we voted on before.
Across.
It's on the red, it's
Yeah.
on the red language.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a first. Do I have a second?
I can second.
All right, second. I don't think we have to have a discussion on this. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. So
So the motion passes. So we can go back to G4 and can have discussion of potential changes that you may want to make.
is there any other potential changes to G4 before we make the motion and Member Glass?
I don't know if it's a motion or just saying, I liked Rory's suggestion of taking out the phrase if the parent requests it. So it becomes routinized. Once everything's done, the school shall provide a copy of the report to the parent 5 calendar days before the Met meeting. So removing the phrase if parent requests it.
I think Director Ross's advice was vote on G4 as is, question mark, then
Oh.
vote on G5 as is, then the new one?
No, we
I think we have to consider this amendment
Okay.
first and then.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
No, member Glass is members are free to make amendments. We're on G4 now. We're approaching it. We've changed school to calendar in the red, and then now we're approaching it as a fresh vote. So members are free to make amendments.
So Member Glass has a motion to take if the parents request it out of the red section of the proposed language. Is there a second on that?
I'll second.
I'll say Member Kavickas. Is there any discussion on that before we consider that amendment? Go for it, Member Glass.
I anticipate, given the makeup and what we've heard so far, that this may not pass. So I'm wondering if anyone representing psychologists or schools, if we change the number of days to like 2 days or something less intense, but still giving parents more than, 1 minute to look at it before the meeting starts, would that be more palatable? I'm wondering if we could discuss that number in the hopes of getting something moved forward.
Go for it.
not a school psychologist, but worked in schools for a long time. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to have a very hard time with any language voting yes right now on this. I just think there's so many problems with the way that it's written. I agree with everything that people have said about, of course, our intent is to get information as early as possible, but anything that's been impacting our timeline with all the other things that we've brought up that are also impacting the timeline, I don't see a way that we're going to get this to language where my vote would change right now.
Okay.
I feel pressure to speak.
Oh.
The only school's like, oh, no, it's fine. It's fine.
Right.
I usually have more vocal colleagues that are
Ah.
present and I don't always have to speak up. Similarly, it's actually really hard for me to vote no on this because I do train and teach to provide reports ahead of time. However, when we get to the complexities of practice, there's a lot of issues. When you're sending reports home, it really needs to be coupled with consultation with the parent, phone call, meetings over the phone. There's a lot of opportunities for misunderstanding when people are not engaging in best practice around the whole evaluation process, case, consultation with family. So I totally agree this is best practice and it should definitely be happening. I think it's problematic legislating it and prescribing it, particularly, and I know I sound like a broken record, but with our workforce issues, I think this is setting us up for a lot of problems because people are stretched so thin and having such a difficult time maintaining compliance, maybe not so much here in Maricopa County with our urban districts, but a lot of our rural districts are in really dire straits right now with staffing. I don't know if I can acknowledge that Colette's nodding, but there's a lot of difficulties with timelines due to really difficult staffing issues right now so. I want the reports to go home early. I'm not sure that writing it and legislating it this way is the way that I can support right now.
Okay. I think at this point a member Pearson, thank you.
I just wanted to reiterate the same thing. When I go out and train, I tell everybody that you should be sending drafts home. It's best practice. It helps create the collaboration between the districts and the parents. But I think legislating it or putting this into a rule the way it is just creates further burden on an already overburdened system.
Member Murphy, and then at that point, we'll go ahead and.
I think the issue is, failing this, not having something like this in there is we have a lot of parents who show up to the meetings and the first time they're seeing a 15, 20, 30-page MET report is at the meeting when the school psychologist is running through it and saying all these terms and abbreviations and standard deviation and all that stuff, terms that they've never heard before, and they have to react. And that's their opportunity. That's their opportunity to sit there and do that. It has to be something that they get, and we should routinize it. And what you had said, Rory, I think at the first meeting is, policy is put in place to build up the practice, to get the practice to be where we want it to be. So I think we should be having it in there so that schools can get used to that. Because if a parent calls me 7 days before the meeting, I tell them, request a copy right now. And most of the time they get it. But if they don't call me or they don't call David or they don't call Amanda or Christopher, a lot of times they don't even know that they can do that. And then they're stuck at the meeting and their head is swimming with a room as big as this or as many people as this. And then they don't know when to ask a question and then that's their opportunity. And then that's it. I think we also, maybe run into, I know there's a concern about that we'll get to later about independent evaluations, but I think sometimes independent evaluations come into play when parents are confused by the process and they feel like we're kind of run through it faster. And I think if we do have a situation where we're giving that report to parents to get a chance to take a look at it, they're more active participants in that meeting and they'll be feel like they're less like blindsided by it. And they might be more appreciative of the process. And maybe that ultimately results in fewer independent evaluations that are needed down the road. But that's just my thought.
Member Pearson, do you have your hand up again? Go for it.
Yeah, sorry. And Richard, I don't disagree with you. I think we all acknowledge and identify that it's an issue. I do think sometimes when we send home, and I think I said this at the last meeting, when we send home scores where the student has a standard score of 75. A parent's like, well, C's equals degrees, and so that's fine. And they don't necessarily understand the standard deviations and all of that kind of stuff. And 100 is average, and 85 to 115 is, what I mean. And so I do worry about that piece of it, but to your point, I agree with you. I don't think it's fair that parents walk in and they've got a 30-page report, and they may be hearing for the first time that their child has an intellectual disability, or that their child may have autism or something like that. And I don't think anybody on the school side wants that to be the issue. I mean, I think, something that I could live with is if we spell out like what needs to be included in that report, whether that comes from like ADE guidance or, an amendment here, which I don't think we'd spend days trying to get that done in this setting. But I think I could live with the idea of, when that draft report is done, we send it to parents. So if a school psychologist is working, up until, meetings on Friday, and they're working Thursday, and they send it home Thursday afternoon, yeah, it's not a lot of time, but it is some time. I just don't want to tie a school psychologist's hands where they're not writing a comprehensive report. I don't disagree that we need to get drafts in the hands of parents. So I want to make that very clear. I don't disagree with that at all. I just don't know how we can get it to them in such a way that we aren't setting the districts up to fail. So if there is no timeline, like once it's done, we send it home before the meeting. That I can live with. But I don't know if that's going to be sufficient for the parent side of things, and because you can send me a MET report and I can go through it in 10 minutes, but as a parent who's new to the process, you're not going to be able to go through it in 10 minutes. So yeah, I don't have a good answer, but I just want to be clear. I don't disagree, and I don't think anybody disagrees that we want these draft reports in the hands of parents before they're going to a meeting. I want to be clear that I don't think anybody thinks that that's a bad thing to do or the wrong way to go.
And Director Ross, I think you have a thought.
Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee. So for process, we do have a motion that has been made by Member Glass about removing the if the parent requests it language. I know you sort of added some pieces after, but what it sounds like is there is a desire to make some changes that would have to just go through an amending and voting process. So what we will need to do is clarify, we have to put an amendment out, that if Member Glass's motion stands, then it would need a second, then you would vote, and then some, Member Pearson could put forward an amendment, and then so that's kind of how the process
keep
would have to
chipping
move
away
forward.
at the amendments at this point.
So Member Glass, do
I
you
can withdraw.
you can withdraw?
I'll withdraw my motion because I feel like we know where things would stand on that. I'd rather move forward with something that's going to move instead of spend time voting on something that.
I wonder at this point, I have a thought of an amendment, but I wonder if we just vote on G4 as written, and then if it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, I'll propose a revised one. I have a thought based on what Member Pearson just said. Is that a plausible way of moving forward?
That is I would actually, for process purposes, Dr. Hagerman, I would make the proposed amendment before voting on the item.
It's just a different version of essentially what I just heard was the concern was about they have no concerns when something's completed that it's sent to parents. The issue is the time. So my one thought is if there's a majority for the 5-day version, then that's the majority. If there's not, is there a version where we take out at least 5-day school days before, and it just says upon completion of your evaluation, you send it to the parents, so that we don't have a team or a school psychologist holding on to a completed report and not sending it to parents.
I don't have problems with anything I've heard so far. I just think it would be very important that we included the word draft report.
Yeah.
So that no
Because
one is assuming that what they received is the final version, and then they come to the meeting confused by why maybe, oh, another rating scale came in. You know, the parent provided more input.
And it
So-
also feels like almost like predetermination. I
Yes.
think, too. Oh. So that was my thought, is we vote essentially the revised thing right now, and then if it passes, we move on. If it doesn't, I'm going to make a version where we take the 5 days out.
That, yeah, you can move forward with that.
So, members, Spencer before.
Is there a way to acknowledge that there would be guidance?
Yeah.
From ADE if that were to move forward?
With the expectation that there's guidance of what exactly, how this process works, something like that.
I just, as somebody who would be, I'd be very worried about compliance and predetermination, and I would want policies and procedures to guide my practice in that area.
So if it would move forward, when it goes to the board, we would need
Pending
this kinds of material.
pending some sort of guidance on what that would.
Member
look like.
Grace.
Yeah, just what you're saying, it just made me wonder, like, is this just guidance? The guidance that says upon completion, the schools will make available, like, does it, because is it on the parent to request it and then we make it available? All schools now have to, as soon as they're complete, make it available.
So
I'm not fully complete. I think I'm gonna get some more things in. Oh, those other things didn't come in. So I actually was complete 5 days ago, but
Yeah.
but I didn't think I was gonna be.
Okay. I mean, how I read it, since we have not taken out if parents request out of it would be upon parent requests. If you have completed documents or completed drafts, you would share that. Rory, do you have any thoughts? I know you're probably spinning in.
I was over here writing a potential
amendment-
recommendation
an
about AD
amendment.
guidance. So what was the question?
There was a question of like just this like procedurally, or how to like remember, Chris, you want to kind of just like the all the ifs and maybe.
Yeah, well, initially I was just thinking, like, is this just guidance and not a rule? That the guidance is upon completion, districts will make available draft MET reports to families, you know, when available, when reasonable,
It feels like a
versus a
rule.
rule. And if it's a rule, then does every evaluation have to go home as soon as it's complete? But again, I might not think it's complete because I'm waiting for some more rating scales to come in and outside thing, and then those things never come in, so it actually was complete, but I was waiting for them, and so I just think there's so many possible, oh, now I've got you and I didn't mean to get you.
Right.
Oh, a member Pearson, thank you.
Can we just have this go to ADE for guidance just in general?
So
The
I
whole
wonder if-
thing, ADE creates guidance on getting draft reports home, all of that
wonder-
kind of
I
stuff,
wonder
instead
getting
of
to the
putting
point
it in a
where-
rule.
I wonder at this point, we just vote on the rule, and then I think we're at this point, we probably just need to clear the deck. And then if it ends up being, I think there's a clear feeling that we need to have something that sheds the intent that parents need to have information before they show up in the meeting, so they're not blindsided, so they can be meaningful participants. And exactly how to get there is unclear, but let's vote, clear the deck of the votes, and then see where we go from there.
And Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee, Rory and I, because we're going to circle back at the end of the meeting with
With
the
the
IEE
IEE.
votes,
We
we
might
can
be able to
include something in this space as well, but we do need to
vote
kind
on
of
this.
get through these two. Yeah.
All right, Member Murphy, before I try to restate the motion and start again.
I would wonder if I could make the motion that a member Glass has removed about the taking out the if parent requests, because I think with what member Crace was saying about, is it complete and I'm waiting for more stuff. If we have it as a timeline, and then it is where it is. So it's like, oh, well, here's the draft. I'm waiting for a BASC from one of my teachers or something like that. So it's not fully complete and it's a draft anyways, because we can't make the decisions until the meeting. So I think making it without the parent request takes away some of the complexity, and also having a days component that's a calendar days component just takes away some of the concern or the questions from the psychologist about how complete is this and is it appropriate to send. The timeline is when it's provided, and I think it takes away the complexity if we leave the parent. So I would make a motion to remove the if parent requests it language.
So there's a motion. There would need to be a second.
Is
and
there a
vote.
second on removing if parents request?
I'll second it.
All right. All in favor of removing if parents request? Oh,
Let's do
sorry.
this as a roll call vote.
Oh, let's do this as a roll
Yeah.
call vote.
So the current motion is to remove the clause if the parent requests it. Member Chapman,
Aye.
Member Kreis,
Aye.
Member Glass,
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman,
Aye.
Member Kaufman,
No.
Member Krivicus,
Aye.
Member Murphy,
Aye.
Member Pearson,
Aye.
Dr. Spencer,
No.
Member Taylor,
Aye.
Member Tiffany.
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman, the motion passes. So the
So, right. So I am now going to read the amended motion for G4 as we just, and stop me if I have this incorrect. Upon completion of the administration of assessments, other evaluation measures, and the evaluation reports, the school shall provide a copy of the evaluation report to a parent at least 5 calendar days before the MET team meeting. Have I stated that correctly? All right. Do I have a motion to approve G4 as amended?
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Do a roll call vote because I feel like we've gone way beyond our 2 to 3 comments at this point.
Member Chapman,
No.
Member Kreis,
No.
Member Glass,
Yes.
Dr. Hagerman,
No.
Member Kaufman,
No.
Member Krivicus, Member Murphy,
Aye.
Member Pearson,
No.
Dr. Spencer,
No.
Member Taylor,
No.
Member Tiffany,
Yes.
Dr. Hagerman, the motion does not pass.
All right, let's go to G5. And I think what we'll end up doing is, depending on how this goes, if we get to that IEE taking a break moment, that we might have to regroup at that point. But G5, as has been amended at this point, states upon completion of an administration of an assessment, other evaluation measures, and evaluation report, if the parent requests it, the school shall provide a copy of the evaluation to the report of evaluation report to a parent at least 5 calendar days before the MET team meeting, so long as the parent requests it at least 10 calendar days prior to the MET determination of eligibility meeting. Do I have a motion to approve G5 as amended?
So moved.
Member Glassen, do I have a second?
Second.
Second from a member Tiffany. I think let's just do a roll call at this point.
So this is a roll call vote for item G5 as read by Dr. Hagerman. Member Chapman,
No.
Member Kreis,
No.
Member Glass,
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman,
No.
Member Kaufman,
No.
Member Krivicus.
I'd like to explain my vote.
Okay.
I just want to hold this conversation as we're thinking about the evaluations, because the whole thing is about timelines. And I think we need to be innovative and think about what we're sending to parents. I mean, they're not standardized. Most parents don't have an attorney or an advocate to call. Most parents don't even call raising special kids numerically, just looking at it. Most of them at best are going to go on a Facebook group page and go, what does this mean? They're going, I don't know. That's not how it looks in my district. There's not even standardization. And the complexity is overwhelming. So not only I would vote, on this, but we have to think when we get to the second part of this meeting about how to innovate and redesign and standardize some of the forms that we're sending to parents so they can even get help from other parents. And with that, I vote no.
Member Murphy,
No.
Member Pearson,
No.
Dr. Spencer,
No.
Member Taylor,
No.
Member Tiffany,
No.
Dr. Hagerman, the motion does not pass.
All right, we move to H1. This relates to preschool programs for children with disabilities. The proposed language changes in the definition of a child with a disability under one or more categories as specified in ARS 15-761 And it also changes the language of the definition, which essentially states of a child with one or more disability categories as specified in ARS 15-761. Do I have a motion to change that language to add the additional definitions? Essentially, it kind of goes to the issue we had last time where we have three kind of preschool definitions, but in reality, all the special ed categories are still applied to preschoolers. And that hadn't been a common thought that was how things worked in the past until recently. Do I have a motion to approve the definition change?
I can make a motion to approve H1.
Second.
And we have a second. Any discussions on this before we do a roll call? Member Glass.
I just want to thank Sean and Roy because I think initially the language had been a disability under one or more categories as specified, and then the citation was to IDEA, but by citing to the state law, we include those special Arizona ones of DD and preschool severe delay. So it's everything under IDEA plus Arizona's extras. So all of them are considered. So I appreciate that.
Perfect. All right. Member Pearson, I'm sorry. Got to keep my eyes on the screen.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, it's me. It's not you.
Yeah, so the only thing with this is we just want to make sure that we get some kind of guidance because some of the eligibility categories are not developmentally appropriate. Like, for instance, we don't necessarily want to be making a 3-year-old eligible for special education as a child with an emotional disability or diagnosing learning disabilities when it's not developmentally appropriate for, children not to reverse letters or something like that when they're like 3 or 4. So I think that's more of an ADE issue because absolutely there are always exceptions to the rule. And so there may need to be some guidance coming out about this, but I just wanted to make sure that that was on the record, that is an area that, out in the community, we're all in support of this, but we just want to make sure that we're doing it right.
There's always the complexity of special ed.
Always.
So yes. All right. Sean, let's do a roll call.
Can I just weigh in and say, I don't think this is gonna, I appreciate your perspective, Member Pearson, and agree with it. I don't think this is gonna change the process there. I think it's really more a funding mechanism so that whatever is developmentally appropriate and results in a child being identified as having a disability under the current requirements is gonna flow funding to districts for it. I don't think it's gonna change practice, but I hear your warning there.
Yeah.
I do think it will change practice because up until this past, I think last year, school districts were under the impression that you could not make kids eligible for special education unless they fell into one of those 4 categories, 5 categories, whatever it was. So it is going to change practice, but I understand it's the funding thing, but I just want to make sure, and I just wanted to get it out there that school districts know that they're supposed to do it the other way now, but we didn't up until 2 years ago, or last year.
Yeah. And I would add one of the practice changes in my mind, I would hope, is that it might help with preschool transitions because there's like these crazy moments where you get one label when you're 3 years old and you get a different one when you're 6, and they were both kind of true when you were 3. And maybe that helps with that conversations and that kind of process. But that's one member's hopefully thinking on the positive side, not the world where we create a bunch of 3-year-olds with SLD and ED labels that we didn't intend. Go for it, Member Grass.
I just wanted to also quickly say that I think, sorry, it's escaped me, but I had something so important to say. Sorry, never mind.
Okay. Member Kavickas.
I think this is another example. Thank you for making that point, Heather, of why we need more transparent, consistent, and standardized evaluation processes that are very clear to everybody. So there's no questions.
All right. Director Ross.
So to reiterate, this is a roll call vote for item H1. Member Chapman?
Aye.
Member Kreis?
Aye.
Member Glass?
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman?
Aye.
Member Kaufman?
Aye.
Member Krivickas?
Aye.
Member Murphy?
Aye.
Member Pearson?
Aye.
Dr. Spencer?
Aye.
Member Taylor?
Aye.
Member Tiffany?
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman, the motion passes.
All right, now, Sean, if I have the roadmap correct, we are now moving on to agenda item 3. All right. Thank you guys for this conversation and for navigating these issues that I feel like I've spent so many special ed meetings in the past trying to figure out. And as we continue to chip away at, I appreciate it so much. We are now going to move on to some items brought forward by Member Glass. In a survey sent to subcommittee members, it was clear that the members wanted more clarity around Member Glass's kind of proposals. So Member Glass is going to walk us through the proposed items.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I remembered what I was going to say when I had my brain fart, which is that we did previously vote to ask ADE to put out guidance on preschool. So there is some that's already a recommendation. So I was just remembering that, and hopefully they'll include what Member Pearson was bringing up in that guidance. So for the first one here, I1, well, I guess there are a few with this. I.1, I.2, and I.3 are all kind of, I don't know if we think they could be stacked or if you're sort of voting for one or the other. So I'm not sure about that, but I'll just kind of say that I've suggested this because I have had experience in my practice of students whose primary language is American Sign Language, being evaluated in a language other than American Sign Language and therefore being mislabeled as having an intellectual disability, put in a class of kids with intellectual disabilities, not being given access to effective communication. And it is already required in IDEA that evaluations be provided in the language most likely to yield accurate results. But I think at least point 2 and point 3 go a little farther and make it a little more specific about what would need to be included in order to ensure that those students are being evaluated in a language most likely to yield accurate results, particularly for those who use augmented communication devices and those whose primary language is ASL. And I'll just briefly say, if you look at I.3, the two little part 1 and part 2, I just want to explain what a CDI is in case individuals on the committee aren't familiar. So by nature of deafness, an ASL interpreter is always a hearing person because they have to be able to hear the spoken word in order to interpret into ASL. So you never have a native speaker ASL interpreter. That can't exist. So often what we will have to do is include 2 individuals, an ASL interpreter who can hear and then interpret into ASL what's being said verbally, but also somebody called a certified deaf interpreter, who is a person who is deaf themselves, is part of the deaf culture. And they can take the ASL interpreted signs, but help to clarify for the deaf person who's being interpreted for, if in case there's dialectical differences or misunderstandings. And so this is best practice when working with a deaf person to use both an ASL interpreter and a CDI. So that's just an explanation of what that is, but I'm happy to try to answer any questions anyone has about these proposed rules.
Dr. Hagerman, Member Glass, before the subcommittee asks questions, to address Member Glass's first question, these are what we call stackable. So each of them could be approved. 1 or 2 could be approved, but not others. So they don't contradict each other.
It's not
It's
one or
why
the
we
other.
separated them into each as individual votes.
All right. Should we just, I'm thinking we make the motion and then take questions, and then the question can be specific to each a specific item as opposed to getting kind of intertwined. All right. So with that, we're going to start with I1. And the proposed change is each public education agency shall ensure that the evaluation materials and strategies are provided and administered in the child's native language, including ASL and or other modes of communication, and in the form most likely to yield accurate information on what the child knows to do, can do academically, developmentally, and functionally, unless it's clearly not feasible to do so. Do I have a motion to approve I1?
I move that we approve I1.
We have Member Taylor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Member Murphy. Now, this is one of my moments, and maybe unfortunately, Member Spencer is going to call it. How different is this from, because it's my understanding we're supposed to be, that this doesn't necessarily seem remarkably different than what's supposed to happen in the first place. And so, like, is there, other than just being explicit in rule, and said it's sort of in federal requirements now, and now it's going to be clearly in rules. Maybe it's Rory, or Does this feel different than what's,
Not in practice.
Okay.
And that was really, I'll take the opportunity to explain my vote that I was going to vote no
Okay.
as an issue of redundancy with current federal legislation and not wanting to complicate laws that we're already currently practicing under.
okay, so it's more, okay, got it. Is there any other questions or member Kreis?
Yeah, I was just wondering a little bit, like, why are we only specifically calling out ASL when there's other types of sign and like a student might sign in another language? Like we interpret in French, we would, if they, you know what I mean? So like there's C sign, so I don't know if it could be, if there needs to be a clarifier that after native language, it says both spoken or signed or something, but like, I agree with what Marcia was saying, that like this is implied in the current law.
Okay.
And I would be open to an amendment to make it more inclusive. The reason I called out ASL is because we have other state level like certifications, and it's defined in statute what it means to be an ASL interpreter in the state. But I'm definitely open to making it more inclusive of all types of sign.
In some ways, by other modes, it's sort of there. And you're basically, if I was going to paraphrase what I just heard, is that you're specifically calling ASL out because there's some clarity around what exactly that means, and some of the other ones there's less clarity. Rory?
Yeah, so the IDA section 300.304 specifies that assessments, it reads kind of the same. Assessments and evaluation materials used to assess a child under this part, little 2I, are provided and administered in the child's native language or other mode of communication. So the only difference that Member Glass is proposing that's variations or adds on from IDA is this piece about including ASL. So I mean, like, I guess to Member Crace's point, the federal language already says in the child's native language. So I guess you'd have to determine, was there reason you want to specify ASL or any other language as a point of order? Because theoretically, native language would be whatever the child's language is, which could be ASL or could be something else. Now, I don't know if there's an Arizona dynamic that makes you want to spell that out for students who use ASL, but that let me just say that to Member Spencer's point, this is language that's already in the federal protections.
To respond, this is not the language I proposed. I think it was taken and tried to be made more palatable by staff potentially, but this was not my initial language. So I think maybe the idea is that this one might pass, but the other ones might not. I'm not sure. So I agree that this is pretty much captured by IDEA, and my hope was really the second two options are the ones I'm more tied to.
Since based on that, and since Director Ross, since we have a motion and a second, I think at this point we just clear the deck of this motion and then keep going. So let's do a roll call.
So this is a roll call vote for item I1 as written. Member Chapman?
No.
Member Crace?
No.
Member Glass?
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman?
No.
Member Kaufman?
No.
Member Krivicus? Member Murphy?
Aye.
Member Pearson?
No.
Dr. Spencer?
No.
Member Taylor?
Aye.
Member Tiffany?
Aye. All right, now let's move to,
So the motion did not pass, Dr. Hagerman.
sorry, we had to wait for the scorecard. Sorry about that. All right, and we move to I2, and this kind for a student who uses any type of assisted communication device, evaluators will be required to have familiarity with the assistive communication device or be assisted by another professional who does have familiarity with the assisted communication device when conditions of a standardized assessments preclude the use of an assisted communication device during assessment. Other forms of assessments will be included in the evaluation process to allow for the use of the assistive communication device. Do I have a motion to approve that before we kind of get into discussion?
So moved.
Member Glasson, do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Murphy. Is there any, I don't know if any discussion items? Member Pearson, thank you.
I know you all thought that I wouldn't talk as much since I was virtual, but you were wrong. Amanda, I just had a question on this piece of it, because when we have students that are using augmentative communication devices, and that would be using it during assessments and those kinds of things, they're pretty, they're proficient on it. And so a school psychologist's full understanding of how a device works. I'm not understanding how that's necessary, I guess, since the students that would be using it during the course of evaluation would be proficient in the use of it. And then the other thing, I don't know if it's a question or a comment or, maybe somebody else who is more knowledgeable than I could jump in, is when using something goes against standardization, my understanding is if the school psychologist is looking to do that assessment, but is conducting it in a way that doesn't align with standardization, they'll report scores, but what they're really looking at more is kind of the analysis of how the child is engaging with that assessment versus what the standardized score is, and that they document that, yes, I didn't use standardization on this, but this is the reason why I wanted to use it, or why I felt it was important, and this is the information that we're able to glean from it. So those were my two questions, comments. Whatever.
I'm looking at member.
I'll
Ms. Bennett,
speak briefly to a technical point. Sorry, you got the psychometrics faculty member here.
Here we go.
I mean, if you're breaking standardization of the assessment that you're using, I would teach that you should not be reporting scores at all, because they are invalid and could be confusing and harmful to the process of the meeting. So as far as standardization goes, I'm not usually an argumentative one. That's why I'm not a lawyer, Heather. But I did just want to clarify that point of practice. We should not be reporting scores that were obtained in a non-standardized fashion.
And as an educator, I've had a moment when the scores live on, even when the context is lost, and that's why you don't want to do
It's
that.
problematic,
Yeah.
but in the meeting, maybe you explain why it's not valid, but then it's there in writing and follows the child forward inappropriately. So.
Okay.
So, sorry, real quick. So if somebody needs to utilize an assessment that doesn't align with standardization, then you would just have them kind of say, this is what we did and this is what we saw, or would you just not have them use it at all?
That's a highly nuanced
Yeah.
question based on the, as an evaluator, I'm always consulting with the expert in the area, whether it be a teacher of the visually impaired, a teacher of the hearing impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, or our assistive technology expert in the district. I'm working hand in hand with them to understand proficiency. And that's a very case dependent question that can get complex and very individualized when appropriately done.
Member Glass.
I just want to respond to your first part. So I put in the word familiarity, not proficiency, and the intent was not that they are, they know exactly how the technology works from a technological perspective. The idea is that they know how to communicate with the student using it. So my intent was simply that if we are administering a standardized test and the student is attempting to make their response using their AAC device, that the evaluator understands their response and is recording it accurately, because they know what the device, how the device works and what that output meant. So simply that somebody, we want the person evaluating the student to be able to understand the student in their mode of communication.
All right. I think at this point we do a roll call.
So this is a roll call vote for item I2. Member Chapman,
No.
Member Crace,
No.
Member Glass,
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman.
I'm going to explain my vote. It's kind of a broader thing. I'm going to be voting no. And I think Member Spencer kind of got into the language of the things that I find so tricky about special ed in general, is that when we make very specific or kind of clear guidance, sometimes it doesn't individualize to the situation. And so there's been times when I think about it, something that would be a great rule for a situation that I'm dealing with, and the rule creates the next problem. And so I'm not sure how all the pieces, or how, like, what happens next happens. And so it's not for the idea that I don't really want a school psychologist to work with a student with an AAC device and walk in the first time and just start doing an assessment without knowing the child and knowing how to navigate and understand how they use their language. But I also don't know. I'm concerned about writing a rule around it. So for that reason, no.
Member Kaufman,
No.
Member Krivicus,
Yes.
Member Murphy,
Aye.
Member Pearson,
No.
Dr. Spencer,
No.
Member Taylor,
No.
Member Tiffany.
Aye.
The motion does not pass, Dr. Hagerman.
All right, so we move to I3. And the proposed changes, a student whose primary language determined by the student and or their parents, not the IEP team or the PEA, is ASL, has the right to have their evaluation conducted by a school psychologist who is fluent in ASL and or with an ASL interpreter and a CDI certified deaf interpreter to provide interpretation and translation. Rory, do you want to?
Yeah, one thing, I should have caught this when we were drafting this support. I would recommend that in the sentence where it says has the right to, I'd recommend you just replace that with shall. It doesn't change the nature of the regulation should it happen, but conveying a right would be inconsistent language with the rest of your regulations, and the attorneys in the room can help me, but conveying a right also has additional kind of dominoing consequences. So if it read, a student whose primary language determined by the student and or their parents, not the IEP team or the PEA is ASL, comma, shall have their evaluation conducted, right? So it conveys that same expectation in regulations without bestowing a specific right, which again is kind of atypical for the regulations. And that's my bad for not cleaning up that language before I sent it out.
All right, so I'm going to let me try to reread it and just
So I
say
think
this.
maybe you needed a.
Do we need to? Is this an amended, or can we just?
We would need to
All right.
do a quick vote.
So now we haven't had a first and a second.
True, actually. So
So-
it could be a amended.
So
as
I'm
part of
going
the
to amend as I state right now before we have to kind of go down the roller coaster ride here. A student whose primary language determined by the student and or their parents, not the IEP team or the PEA, is ASL shall have their evaluation conducted. Rory, did I just say that right? All right. 1, by a school psychologist who is fluent in ASL and or 2, with an ASL interpreter and a certified deaf interpreter to provide interpretation and translation. Do I have motion to approve I3 as amended by the chair?
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Glass and Member Murphy. Any 1 or 2 to 3 comments before we go ahead and vote? Member Spencer.
Oh, sorry.
No, wait.
Your token school psych today.
No, I know this is in your wheelhouse. But I know you're going to have to say.
I don't usually do this much talking at meetings. As far as not the IEP team, determination of a student's primary language is a really important part of our evaluation process and is done with a collaboration of experts, including parents or caregivers as experts. But the IEP team is an integral part of that decision to make sure we're doing an appropriate evaluation, meeting the IDEA legislation that was earlier referenced about evaluating a student in the language most likely to yield accurate and valid results.
So we're just, I have a
We're
question.
just
I'm sorry.
go, no, a procedural question.
Voting on the term shall.
No, the whole thing. I have amended it before it even started. So
Yes, I believe that it is under IDEA, I believe it's the PEA who determines the native language.
Rory, any feedback other than just, okay. So we'll take a moment.
It's in the regulation, it says native language when used with respect to an individual who's limited English proficient means the language normally used by the individual, or in the case of a child, the language normally used by the parents of the child, which I think the parents would know better than the PEA. I don't know if the PEA needs
But
to be involved.
there's nothing in rule that says as determined by the PEA.
I didn't see anything in there.
Okay. So we're just clarifying what that means in Arizona and how that process works. Director Ross, I think we can do a roll call vote at this point.
So we are voting on item I3. Member Chapman,
No,
Member Crace,
No.
Member Glass,
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman,
No.
Member Kaufman,
No.
Member Krivicus,
Yes.
Member Murphy,
Aye.
Member Pearson,
No.
Dr. Spencer,
No.
Member Taylor,
I just want to clarify that I really like what you're trying to do here. I think it's maybe just some complications, but my vote is no.
Member Tiffany?
Aye.
Member, Dr. Hagerman, the motion does not pass.
All right, we go to I4. And this is a definition. This parent has the same meaning as prescribed in 34 CFR 300-30 and the dependency Title 8 guiding. Oh, here we go. Guardianship or termination of a parental rights action pursuant to Arizona RP Juvenile Court 310C. If a judicial order identifies a person or persons under 34 CFR 300.30A 1 through 4, or appoints a surrogate parent who meets the requirements of 34 CFR 300.519D to I and E to act as the parent or a child of a child or to make educational decisions on behalf of a child, then such persons or persons shall be determined to be the parent for the purpose of this definition. One of those moments I wish I had Suri to read this definition for me because I could not navigate it. But basically, it's trying to really help us navigate the issues of guardianship. Do I have a motion to approve I4? Is there a question?
Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee, Member Glass had explained the first three items.
Yeah.
Hasn't had a chance to speak to this one
All
yet,
right.
so I think she wants to speak. And plus, she has a handout as well.
I wonder, can we do the motion and the second and then do this as a discussion, or do we need to set the table before we get to that point?
Because we set the table, the items
All right.
first last time,
All
let's
right,
do that
it.
first.
All right, so Member Glass.
Thank you, sorry.
No worries.
So the chart, the color chart that you have is something that I provide when I do trainings for DCS, foster parents, foster care providers, group homes. There's a huge misconception, I think, amongst all parties, DCS, schools, foster parents, about the difference between special education decision-making rights and general ed decision-making rights. And for those of you who run schools, I don't know how often you encounter this, but DCS caseworkers trying to sign as if they're the parent at an IEP meeting. Yeah.
Every
So
single
I
day.
promise I'm out there trying to help educate them, but much like in the school settings, there's a lot of turnover at DCS. So there's always a lot of training to have for the frontline people. But so that's an issue, DCS not understanding that they're not the parent. Then we have foster parents who are provided a form by DCS that says notice to provider on it, which explicitly the form needs to be revised. We're not doing that here, but the form is supposed to delegate some of DCS's rights as to that child to the caregiver, whether it's a foster parent or a group home. And so sometimes those individuals think they're the IDEA parent. So there's confusion on that end. So we passed this rule at the juvenile court level, asking the court to start identifying who the IDEA parent is in their minute entries, because as IDEA stands, this flow chart kind of exists per IDEA, but there is sort of a escape valve that says, or whoever a court has named, which makes it easier. And then we don't have three different agencies trying to figure it out based on a kid's circumstances on this particular day. So the hope would be that the courts are still generally following IDEA's flow here, with preference for bio or adoptive parent retaining that right, even when the kid is in out-of-home care. Unless one of the conditions in the little stop sign have been met, like bio parents are dead, or their whereabouts are unknown, they're not acting in the best interest of the child. So the hope is that the court will kind of follow this, but the court will be the juvenile dependency court. So the court managing the foster care issue, the foster care case, they'll be the ones to figure out who this person is, put it in writing in a court document, so that ideally DCS and the school, everyone's on the same page, because you have something from a court clarifying who that person is. And they are updating it every time they have a hearing, because we know kids move around a lot and things could change. So the idea of what I'm suggesting here is simply to cross-reference this new juvenile court rule and sort of ask that schools look to that court document rather than substituting their judgment for who the IDEA parent is in a given situation. So it's just everything that Dr. Hagerman read is pretty much verbatim what the new juvenile court rule is, and it's a cross-reference to that.
I would just say what Dr. Hagerman attempted to read, but yes. And I just personally, I just want to thank you because just like we all jumped up, this is such a challenge. And parent DCS parents coming in and wanting to sign, or you have a student that you need to do some work with, and you can't figure out how to get the process started. So I personally appreciate your work in a chart, not even just getting the language together, but trying to put it together in a format. I personally appreciate that. Is there any other member Kavickas?
Sorry, thank you, Member Glass, for educating me on this issue. Do we need to specify that DCS, I'm looking at the bottom of your,
You have to say it a million times because they're still going to
no,
come in.
that's what I'm saying. Do we need to specify that
In the room.
in the rule?
We could, I mean, the cross-reference to the juvenile court rule, the juvenile court should know that, but yes, I mean, I'm happy to put that in because that is the juvenile court, like the judge in the juvenile court could misunderstand themselves and name DCS, which would cause a whole new host of problems. So I'm happy to put that in.
I'm also fast forwarding to the school conversations and the DCS person and the people at the school don't know, and they're just assuming that DCS does. So I just think it might be helpful.
Member Pearson, and then I'm going to ask for a question about like procedurally or this process. I don't think it's a big one, but so don't.
Yeah, Member Kravickas, it is DCS comes in all the time and it tells us that they're the IDEA parent. The school psychologists are pretty well versed in this, but Member Glass, I very much want to thank you for identifying this as an issue and taking the initiative to get it done through the juvenile system, because we have really struggled with this over the course of the last several years. But yeah, DCS still says that they are the IDEA parent all the time. So thank you for this. And I would be on board with including something that says amending it to say DCS is never the IDEA parent.
Okay. Colette, go for it.
In statute, it also allows ADE to appoint a surrogate parent. So how does this law work with?
So my understanding of statute is that if there is no IDEA parent that can be identified, the LEA is required to go to ADE to get a surrogate within 30 days. If at the initial removal, when the kid is being taken from the home and put under dependency, at that stage, the judge should be naming who the IDEA parent is. So there should be no need, and this should help reduce the need for ADE to have to independently appoint. There will still be a need for surrogate parents very widely. But surrogate parents can be named by ADE or named by the court. And so this way it would be in writing from the court, and we're not having to have the school say, we can't find them. Did we call all these people? Okay, now let's go ask ADE. And then you're having to talk to Stephanie and figure it all out. So I think the hope is that a judge who's hearing about the kids' whereabouts and safety on a regular basis and hearing from DCS and bio parents and any other party is able to kind of make a judgment about, is there a bio parent? Is there a kinship placement? Like, go through this list. And then if there is nobody, because they're in a group home, they've been severed, whatever, yes, a surrogate needs to be named. And they can either order, the order could say so-and-so is going to be the surrogate parent, or it could order that, I mean, they can't order schools or ADE to do anything, but they could order DCS to work with ADE in the school to get a surrogate appointed.
Are you working on language, or do you have something that do you have something to propose as an amendment, and then we can see if there's, and now who was it was Member Glass and Member Kavickas as we haven't done it yet. Thank you. I'm too far down I'm at that place where all the motions are blending together.
Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee, we could add a letter B that simply says, or sorry, a little I that says, in this case, a DCS representative may not act as the parent.
Okay, so what the chair will do.
Sorry, can I just, I think another thing that, again, you may, as schools have seen, is it could be DCS or it could be a group home staff if a kid's in a group home. And technically it also cannot be them because they are contracted with and therefore employed by DCS. So when a kiddo is in a group home, can't be DCS or any group home staff. So I think you kind of said that, but I think maybe clarifying DCS or anyone affiliated with the child welfare agency. I'm also wondering if we should say child welfare instead of DCS. Because the other complicating, sorry to make everything so complicated, but there's also kids in tribal social services custody. So DCS is our state child welfare agency, but occasionally kiddos who are tribal can be in tribal social services custody, but because of sovereignty and Indian law, which I'm absolutely not an expert on, my understanding is that if they're in tribal social services custody, those courts can make the tribal social services support person the IDEA parent. So anyway, all of that backing up a little bit, I guess we stick with DCS because the tribal stuff is weird. So can never be DCS or any contracted employee or something like, I don't know. Ms.
Question,
Chapman?
and this, I don't have, this is not a place of deep expertise for me in Arizona law around parental guardianship. But my question is, given all the things member Glass just said, does that exist somewhere already in regulation? Like, could you, I mean, I guess I have a
something.
question about whether or not you need to reiterate something that's already in regulation. Is this a place where people are just confused about how to implement something that already exists? If it is, you might think about technical
yeah.
assistance. If not, then I'd ask, and you're the expert in this, not me, is there some like, rather than giving a laundry list of all the things that, you know, we don't mean this and we don't mean you and we don't mean you either, is that referable?
I think DCS is actually in IDEA. It says it will not be the child welfare agency. I'll have to pull it up, but I think that's in federal law. But I do agree that it would still be helpful given how often it happens here that DCS thinks they are.
I believe it's in state statute as well.
Okay, so maybe we can find that.
So
in
yeah,
cross-reference.
yeah.
No, Director Ross, can we, my thinking is because this isn't the be all end all of this rule, that we vote on this as is. Me and the other board members realize that we want to add the clarifying language and we wordsmith that at the board level or in the input process, as opposed to now. Member Crace.
I just have a quick question, and Tina, you might be the person who knows the most about this. Or maybe Colette, didn't ADE just recently make it where the schools have to identify the IDEA parent in their student information system? Like that's a new thing that everybody's actively working on, right? So is there some guidance from that would align to this?
There was a memo sent out last summer that it was going to be a requirement starting in the student management system this year. I just went through cycle 4 audit and they said that it's still a requirement. It's just not an enforceable requirement yet. I think that there's some additional information being collected. So we're working towards having that identification in the student management system. It's just not a spot check as of right now.
I mean,
Dr. Hagerman, just to clarify,
yeah.
Would the subcommittee want to vote on that initial language, knowing the board could shape it so that the DCS piece is in there?
My thinking is the intent would be that we vote on it, but we're going to add some clarifying to be as bulletin boardy big that this is not how it, and then we work that out because maybe out of that guidance and what's going to be in Synergy or your SIS system helps out, or however it looks like we start here, but we know that we need to get even clearer and figure out how to make that work so that we don't wordsmith ourselves to death on a Thursday.
Yeah, I would hope that language would help because, I mean, I'm being honest, there's probably a lot of like school registrars who are going to be like, you're the IDA parent. And they need a very easy flow chart to be like, yo, that's you, because again, that's a new requirement that all schools are working on.
Well, I think reference to that court document would be amazing to know we need to ask for this specific form and that's our go-to source is
Kind of
really
goes in,
powerful. That's
comes part of your
Yeah.
back to school.
I think that's the clarity of knowing which form to reference.
I will just say that nothing is perfect, obviously, when you roll it out. So I don't know. Anyone who's working with kids in foster care, you could start asking DCS, can we get them? The minute entry is where it should be. The minute entry that says who the IDEA parent is. But I will tell you that Pima County, anyone from Pima is doing great. Pima County Dependency Court is really great about education issues, and the other counties are not yet, but I'm pushing it. So just because it's in here and it's a rule does not mean the courts are following it. So I hope when the questions come from the schools, they'll get better about it. But just so you know, it may not be happening as it should be yet on the ground. And I'm sorry about that.
I'm going to propose kind of like to make this incremental change of voting on the motion as it's here. But I think the members who are here who will be on the board would know that there's more additional things that we can wind in when we get at the board level. And you can tell from my personal experience, I am 100% with Member Glass on the things we're trying to navigate here. So I'm going to ask for a motion to approve I-4 as written initially in front of us. And for the sake of all of us, I'm not going to try to reread it through it if that's okay. Do I have a motion to approve I-4?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I think we had enough discussion. Oh, Member Pearson, I'm sorry. Go for it.
Oh, no, sorry. I
Yes.
forgot to lower my hand last time. I apologize.
Okay, no worries. All right, Sean, can we do a roll call?
Member Chapman,
Aye.
Member Kreis,
Aye.
Member Glass,
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman, Member Kaufman,
Aye.
Member Krivicus,
Aye.
Member Murphy,
Aye.
Member Pearson,
Aye.
Dr. Spencer,
Aye.
Member Taylor,
Aye.
Member Tiffany,
Aye.
Dr. Hagerman, the motion passes.
All right, now we move to item 4. Member, can we take we'll take a little bit of a break here. We'll take a 5-minute break for the sake of all the members on the committee. And thank you guys for your first. We'll take a couple minutes here.
Lights on, they're going
Yeah.
up and down.
It wasn't just me.
Right. We're not all fading.
I was like,
or maybe
I'm
we
doing
are.
a stroke protocol on myself right now.
I'm gonna stick my tongue out.
Dr. Ross is organizing. Are we at a? All right, so we are now going to move to item 4 of Director Ross. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
So you're organizing yourself.
Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee. During the May meeting, the subcommittee began its discussion about independent education evaluations. During that meeting, the subcommittee the discussion had centered on landed on sort of one large topic, and we crafted an example recommendation from that topic. So just to share, the subcommittee recommends that ADE develop state-level guidance for the established criteria for PEAs to accept independent education evaluations, which schools will use to develop guidance for parents. So the discussion had centered on the need for, at every level, state level, school level, family level, just an understanding of what should be in the IEE or what should be part of that process so that there's clarity of expectation. And so we had built just as a reminder of that discussion had occurred already in May. The goal of this is a 15 to 20-minute discussion that will lead to the generation of recommendations, which Rory and I will collect and craft and then share with you all for a vote.
All right. Who would like to begin the discussion with a specific question, concern, or idea for a recommendation around IEEs? Member Crease.
I'm just thinking back, and Tina, maybe you could help me. I could be completely wrong here, but a couple years ago, didn't legislatively it get passed that ADE needed to do cost criteria for IEEs, and then if they didn't do it, then the county superintendents had.
No.
I'm mixing that with something else.
There was discussion of that, but I
Okay.
don't know if it was officially put forward. for
Okay, I thought there was some sort of legislation around that, and that ADE needed to do it, and if they didn't, then the county superintendents, and if they didn't, then but I wonder if some of that work could come back to like help guide, because I know there was a lot of effort around that a while ago.
Is that related to when ESA special ed evaluations are conducted? I think that might be a tangential topic, but not this one.
Member
That-
Pearson.
Yeah, that's tied to the ESA. ADE was going out for bid to find providers that would evaluate students for purposes of ESA. And put together a list. If they were unable to or didn't do that, then it fell to the county superintendents. And if the county superintendents didn't do it, then it fell on the districts. So and what made the language confusing is that in the statute it called it independent educational evaluations.
Oh
And
yes,
so
I remember those meetings now.
yeah, so it was kind of a mess.
All right. Hearing it was kind of a mess. I wonder if there's a different direction we go into. Anyone else?
Was just for clarity, because I'm just asking on the break actually to make sure I knew what I was prepared for. Was this the question around like school districts having to take families to due process if they got an eval that didn't line up? Is that the IEE issue that
And I
had been
think
brought up?
if I now restate, I think that the hope is that if we had like a lot more clarity in saying when you go to get an IEE, these are the components that need to be in it, so that when a parent's trying to follow this process doesn't get to the backside of the process and find out that
For sure. So we're building on that specific conversation as opposed to like a totally open
that's at
discussion.
least
on
I
IEE.
hope is the starting point and
Okay.
of that's the
Just
thought.
wanted to get oriented.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Director Ross, am I restating that correctly? Sorry.
That is correct.
Member Chapman.
I need some clarification of what Sean said. So, is it they want ADE to develop IE criteria?
So the conversation, to go back to Dr. Spencer, had centered on the need for clarity for what is required for an IEE to be valid, to be accepted. And there was confusion at sort of a state level, school level, parent level. So the idea had been that ADE would develop state level guidance for the established criteria for PEAs to accept IEEs. And then the schools could in turn use state level guidance to develop guidance that's more sort of parent friendly, though ADE could do that as well.
So, anything else, Member Chapman, other than just, and then we'll go to Member Grace.
I'm a little bit concerned because there are several different types of evaluations and such, and that's usually a local level decision, like the IE criteria. So I'm concerned about that. Also, I believe that the guidance that we have on our website is really sufficient. There's nothing really too hard about IEEs, except that if a parent requests an IEE, the school has to pay for it, or their option is to go to due process. And so if the schools want guidance on, I'm not sure what the guidance,
How would it be
you would
different?
have to be very specific. Yeah.
Member Grace.
Yeah, IEEs are very challenging for schools and many times create a lot of contention between families and school teams, and not intentionally, but it frequently happens. And so my concern here is, and any attorney in the room or anybody, we can have the clearest criteria in the world. But the only way to say that your IEE request doesn't meet our criteria is to file due process. I can't say you don't meet the criteria, so please go pick somebody else. I have to file, and I know this because I lost this exact scenario. A family, and our criteria are not hard. They must use the most current versions of the assessments. They must have experience with that age of a student. We request that there's an observation in the school setting, but it's not like you must have 17.6 years of experience and you have to be at least 5'6". Like there's not like no crazy things in there. It's very very easy. And so this family that requested their IEE requested a provider. I contacted the provider and they said, we cannot meet your criteria. We cannot do an in-school observation for 9 months. And so I said, family, please select somebody else. Family filed a state complaint against me and I lost because I didn't file due process against them to say pick someone else. And that was here in Arizona in the last 5 years.
Member Pearson, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, and to Grace's point, or to Clark's point, sorry, Member Grace. Someday I'll get this right. To Member Grace's point, when the criteria of an evaluation of a classroom observation or an in-school observation is not something that districts have pulled out of thin air. That is set out in federal law that when we're doing psychoeducational evaluations and evaluating children for special education eligibility, there has to be a classroom observation. And so to say that when a parent has selected a provider that won't do that classroom observation, that we now have to turn around and just functionally sue a parent. I mean, it just, instead of being able to say to a parent, they don't meet the criteria because they're not going to do this federally required component of an evaluation, just seems a little tough. And with the last presentation that Alyssa did at the last meeting, one of the things that threw me off was that if a parent comes in with an outside evaluation and we say, no, it doesn't meet our criteria, we're still having to file due process against them. And I think having, we can say all day long, these things are required, but, sometimes people want what they want, or, they get on parent Facebook groups like Member Kravickas was talking about, and they get information and it's not necessarily the correct information. But, for a school district to file due process, it's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars, and they are not allowed to go in and represent themselves. They have to have counsel because they're a governmental entity. And, I had a client several years ago who tried to file due process on their own with the Office of Administrative Hearings, and they were told, no, you have to have a lawyer. So it just, yeah, I think there's just got to be some clarity. I think, the cost, and I talked about this last time, where as a parent of a child with a disability, if I called and said, hey, I want my child evaluated, with a lot of these evaluators, the cost is different for me coming in as a parent versus what they would charge a school district. And I got cornered after the last meeting as well about like, hey, we can't put cost criteria on this. We can't set this, precedent, because then we're going to limit parents' ability to do things. But there's got to be a better way that is in compliance with the law, that works for families, that works for school districts. And, fine, we're paying $5,000 for an evaluation where they don't come in and do a observation of the student in the school setting, because we don't want to spend, $15,000 to not pay $5,000. But then the parent comes in and says, we're like, well, that's all fine and good. We've considered it, but there's no in-school observation. So everything kind of just doesn't matter. And so I don't know how we get around that piece of it. And whether it's, we post on our website like we do the process for requesting evaluations, of if you want an outside evaluation, this is the process you need to follow. Or I just don't know how to make the two meet, because I understand parents need that outside information. They may need confirmation of what the school district is saying to them. To Mr. Murphy's point, they walked into a meeting, got a 30-page document, had an hour of a meeting, they still don't understand. And so they're going to get this information so they have a better understanding. But there's something has to give. I mean, school districts are spending an incredible amount of money every year on independent educational evaluations. And because of that different guidance that we got this last meeting, it's going to be even more. Because we're not going to want to file due process when a parent goes and gets an evaluation from a dyslexia expert who has no credentials, no ability to diagnose anything, but the parent paid $1,800 for it. And in order for us to say, no, we're not reimbursing you for that, we now have to file due process against them.
Member Kavickas?
Thank you, members. And Heather, I agree with all of your points, but it kind of comes back. I know I sound like a broken record, but the problem is a lack of transparency and consistency. Nobody in the field, especially parents, have any idea what the diagnosis criteria are. They don't know. I went through the entire process in a very amicable situation with my school, I might add. Had no idea until the whole thing was over that they ever even did a school evaluation. I can't read that 40, 50 page report. And I think you all would agree. I know a little bit more than probably most parents do. And there are a bunch of states out there. Wisconsin is one that I've really loved, in Colorado, because I've been looking at this. They do evaluation criteria for all 13 disability categories. It's almost like a cover sheet. If somebody, and it's like a template, they do trainings, criteria, guides on all 13 disability criteria. So it's very, very clear to everybody involved in the system, regardless of what district or charter school you go to. These are the criteria. Obviously, the processes, the tests you might use might be different, and there's room for individualization, but it's very clear, it's very transparent. On my MET, I would have gotten that autism criteria I would have seen in Colorado, it's 6 things. These are the 6 things that we had to do. I had no idea. Now I've done 2 private evals, I've done 2 school district evals, and I never knew until this committee and I started digging that any of this stuff existed. So that's partially why you get the confusion when the parent sits down, even if they had 5 days, by the way, to read a really complicated report. And the immediate reaction is to push back. I want another opinion and stuff, is because there was no transparency. And I think the state could do a lot to provide consistency.
Member Chapman?
I just want to make sure we.
Oh, I'll turn your microphone on, please. It's not playing along.
Okay. I just wanted to bring the conversation back to the issue at hand, which is IEE. And that means that a parent disagrees with the evaluation. The law is very clear on what steps the school has to take. I do believe that we have good guidance and we could, work on that with a group of stakeholders, if you would like that. I really don't think anything needs to be in rule, but we could definitely provide guidance.
Member Kafikas?
I hear you, Member Chapman. I'm trying to get to the original point that Member Pearson is how do we stop this increased flow of IEEs? And I think part of that is making the system easier and more transparent, so parents don't immediately think that's what I need to do, is get that. And so it's to both sides. I guess it's to the entire process. Again, I'd love to share with you the committee members. I've shared them with staff, some of the examples I've seen from other states. This isn't like Carla just coming up with crazy ideas. Lots of states have done stuff like this, mainly in autism, quite frankly, and SLD. Those are the two, because you guys know all those reasons better than I do, that are more contentious than, let's say, an ID. But again, as a kind of a parent representative here, I'm telling you guys, I've gone through this 2 kids, 4 evaluations. I never knew what the evaluation criteria were. And I had to get my own advocate because I couldn't just go through the report. So
we'll do Member Pearson and then Member Craze. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
I guess this question is more for Rory. What do other states have cost criteria? How have other states kind of set this up? Because I know Colette and ADE feel like the regulations are clear, and I feel like they're about as clear as mud. So, Rory, are you aware of what other states have done? How it looks in other states?
You know, I'm just searching for that document that we gave you. That's the regulations across all the other states.
Yeah.
Let me pull that up and take a little look because I don't remember off the
Okay.
top what they've done about cost. Kelly, do you know?
How
The big one
about
for me is
we'll give you
cost.
some moments, then we go to Member
Yeah,
Craze, and then maybe we
yeah.
come back.
About cost, but, and I'll look that up. I guess the thing I would say, I think you've got a few different issues here you're trying to untangle. You're trying to untangle who pays. So you get into due process land about who pays for it. That's one bundle of thing. And there's federal regulations that speak to how you manage and when you're required to file due
Who
process about
decides?
disagreement about payment. So I don't know if you can resolve that because you can extend beyond federal requirements, but you can't refute federal requirements. So that's a little tricky around the payment part. Then you've got the question of how do I know what I'm even supposed to get, right? So I'm a parent, I want an IE. How do I know, to Carla's point and Clark's, about what the criteria are? You could have a recommendation that speaks to the department developing technical assistance to make the requirements clear. And we have a draft recommendation about that we can read to you. And I'll look up the cost thing while we're talking.
Okay, and Member Craze.
Yeah, I have 2 things that I'll try to be as quick as I can. Like around the cost, I'm not going to quote this correctly, but I know that like whether it's in Arizona or IDA, it's something about like it should be kind of commensurate to what it would cost the district, which it's nowhere near that. They charge us so much more than what would cost our own staff to do that. But I think the problem with any of those things, make the requirements crystal clear, no room for misinterpretation. It doesn't matter. They can still go do whatever they want. And the only way for me to say this doesn't meet this crystal clear criteria is to take you to due process. So I just think that none of it fixes it because of the way, like Rory's saying, the federal law, it's kind of tight there. The other thing,
That comes into place if they want you to pay for it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how you deal with that because
Right.
again, that's the federal's
I
requirement.
think that's outside our, I mean, our dilemma I have is that a lot of this is outside of our purview. And it kind of goes, just to like just jump in before you finish, it reminds me of the question of when a parent makes an initial request, there was members who were wanting to try to figure out something that can happen if this district just gives a PWN, and there's like, is there some step in between? And there's like, we don't have a lot of flexibility the way the feds are written that. And I'm feeling like now on the school side, there's not a lot of flexibility because the process says the action is this, and we would hope for something more nuanced. And I mean, I'm just paraphrasing what I'm hearing, and it just reminds me of a previous discussion where we had another moment. And the rules can only fix or clarify certain things; they can't clarify others. Keep going.
Yeah, and just probably like things thrown at me, but the wild idea. you know, we have state procurement processes. We have, when I get a certain grant, I have to go through the Arizona procurement portal to figure out who I'm gonna use that money with, and I can only use people who are approved for there. Like, I don't know if it would be in contradiction to IDA, but like, is there a world where the state could say, we are creating this by county, by region. Here is the criteria. You have to be on the approved state list and in order for schools to spend taxpayer money on this. Like, I don't know if there's a world where something bigger like that could happen and it could be appropriate by region and the costs are going to be different in Tucson versus Flagstaff versus, you know, Surprise or whatever it might be. But it just, all of these things that we do won't help.
That's the issue.
Yeah, I don't think.
Member Pearson?
Yeah, and I just real quick, I just want to give an example, not to beat a dead horse, but I'm happy to do so, as you all know. With the last presentation and some of the discussion that was had was, well, what happens when we have the parent who goes and gets that evaluation on their own and it doesn't meet district criteria? And so, you know, there was some discussion about, you know, well, if you don't consider it, you're running the risk of, you know, having a complaint filed against you, being found out of compliance if you're not filing due process. So just pulling straight from the regulation, it says for parent initiated evaluations, it says if the parent obtains an independent educational evaluation at public expense or shares with the public agency an evaluation obtained at private expense, the results of the evaluation must be considered by that public agency if it meets agency criteria and any decision made with respect to the provision of FAPE and may be presented by any party as evidence. But under C, where it says that parent goes and gets it at private expense, there's nothing there that says if it doesn't meet district criteria, the district has an obligation to file due process against the parent. And so that's why I'm saying, like, I know ADE's position is that this is very clear what districts need to do, but it's not, because when it's talking about evaluations obtained at private expense, it's not saying we have to file due process against the parent if it doesn't meet district criteria and we're not going to be considering it. So again, I think we do need some clarification. And to Member Crease's point, it would be amazing if we had something like the procurement process, or, you know, we've got our approved list for independent education evaluators, that, you know, they've met state criteria, that they understand that, you know, they've got to do these things as part of the independent education process. I think that would be incredibly helpful for school districts. The other thing is one more thing, when school districts have contracted and issued purchase orders for evaluators, and evaluators don't complete the evaluation as it was contracted with the district. To me, that is more of a contract issue between the school district and that private evaluator than it is whether or not the district is, you know, funding those independent educational evaluations. Because if we say to an independent educational evaluator, here's your criteria, these are the things you need to do in order to get paid, and they haven't done it, well, that's a contract issue between the district and that evaluator. That's not the district refusing to fund an educational evaluation. It's, you know, they haven't done what they need to do, but then we're stuck filing due process against a parent to say, yeah, we're not paying it because your evaluator didn't meet the contractual obligations that it had with the district. So that's it.
All the ones. Rory, I saw earlier you were looking at me like you had some thoughts, and then we'll go to Member Kavikas.
I'm just trying to think this through, right? So I don't know. I think other states, I was looking about the stuff. Other states don't really have information in their regs about cost. It's largely a reiteration. Wow, that is a hard word. Largely a reiteration of what exists in IDA. That said, outside of special ed land, states do have, in some cases, statutes and in some cases regulations that speak to vendor qualifications and, you know, approved vendor lists. Like this was popular when No Child Left Behind was passed in the 2000s, and, you know, how you got on to various lists to provide kinds of services. So I wonder if it would be something you could do in Arizona, I don't know. Could you have something that required IE providers meet established criteria under IDA, and I'll say more about that, in order to be an approved IE provider, right? Like, could you specify essentially like you're only eligible for reimbursement for an IE if the IE meets the required components for a given disability category identification? Like, could you get at something that's kind of like not an approved vendor list? That I recommend you not do that, because in the past states have actually like listed names, and that's a hot mess. But could you do something that said you're only eligible for reimbursement if the IE meets the required criteria for any given disability category? And I don't know, you might have to have a deputy attorney general weigh in on whether or not you could
Yeah.
have such a rule. I don't know if you
But
could.
doesn't it still just get back to the point, the only way I can prove it doesn't meet the criteria is to file like, how do I prove it doesn't meet the criteria? Because that's just my opinion that they're.
Yeah, so then I think separately from, am I still in green? Separately from that, I think you might want a recommendation that reads something like this. The subcommittee recommends that ADE develop guidance to make clear what the required contents are for inclusion in an IEE for any given disability category, which PEAs could then use to develop guidance for parents. So essentially what that would say is that ADE would be specifying, I'm trying to assess eligibility for a child for specific learning disabilities, right? Is one of the 13 categories under IDA. If that's true, you're required to have this, and that. It's sort of like Carla's checklist idea.
Member Kafikas.
I really like where you're heading with that, Rory, and I just wanted, for the sake of the committee, this is really referencing Rule R72401E7 that actually has, if you have a chance to look at it, it says for the following disabilities, the full and individual initial evaluation, which could be the IEE as well, will include all of these things. They haven't been updated since the 80s. There's not even one for ID in there. That was really the impetus for this committee from my personal perspective, was that particular section of rule regarding evaluations has never been updated. And there's actually criteria even missing. So I just wanted to connect so you guys know where I'm kind of headed, but I like where Rory was going. And that was because of when I discovered that is when I started looking at what other states were doing and said, oh, states have done that. But at its best, we need at least update it because it hasn't been. And
yeah, there are a number of states who have criteria that says this is what's required in order to assess whether or not a student is eligible for special education under the identification of autism, of, deaf blindness, of intellectual disability. I mean, a number of states do have that kind of specificity in their regulations. And then I've seen, like, when I was a state special education director in Nevada, we had that, and it sort of was just a little rule book that everybody followed. Like, oh, we all know what to look for if we're thinking it's this potential disability category, right?
Marcia, what does that look like for you now?
I guess I don't live in the world of the legal text. I mean, I have criteria for all of this that I work under for all of the categories. My primary reference point is the, we call it ASTAS. I'm not sure what the full name. The technical assistance, I believe specifically for evaluations. I think the most recent version is 2019-ish. And so there's sample eligibility forms in there. None of these evaluation or eligibility categories really particularly vary even from state to state. We're referencing IDEA criteria. Sometimes it's formatted a little bit differently. I think one of the biggest areas of nuance is the requirement for classroom observation, which is, I believe, only specifically required for SLD. I think it's probably good practice for everybody. Otherwise, I'm not making the criteria up for each individual case. It's established federal criteria that I find most easy to reference in our ASTAS manual available on the ADE website. And occasionally there's additional district procedures that might specify how to meet the federal criteria. They might give you kind of a worksheet of examples of adaptive assessments to consider as part of your autism or ID evaluation or DD evaluation. would be this, just to help folks along. But I've never felt that these criteria were in question. And I guess I generally know what I'm working under.
I mean, I guess then you have to ask yourselves, and I don't know the answer for Arizona, does it need to be in regulation, or is it perfectly adequate to have it under technical assistance? And if it's good to have it under technical assistance, is there a need for more people to know where to find the ASTAS information? I don't know the answer to that.
I guess like as a taxpayer, I would wonder, and as somebody who's doing this for the schools being paid by taxpayers, I would wonder why somebody in private practice would be being paid for doing work that doesn't meet the criteria that I have to meet in the school district.
I think
And
because a district would rather go ahead and settle and pay the thing for $5,000 or whatever versus the 50 grand it's going to take you to file due process.
Because the
That's my
person who gets to
educated.
decide it doesn't
yeah.
match is not
Um,
the school district. I think it's not the legal thing. The dilemma is that the entity that decides whether it's in or out is not the school district. It's a due process.
I think I'll let the lawyers duke it out, but I think it's really unfortunate to ever put families and schools in a
Yeah.
position where due process is
Yeah,
the
I
only
think
option.
I think we've had a couple of moments like that so far in these meetings. No,
I think to Dr. Spencer's question, I think it's both. So I've seen the AZTAS document myself, but regardless, our rules need to be updated. And I don't know if it's what so the rules should always be very high level. And obviously the much more detailed complexities and sample forms and stuff would be in an AZTAS. So I don't know, I think the two need to meet. Because again, these in rule haven't been updated since forever, but I do know.
Share the title, I get that
It's
long thing that you
R7.
read.
No, it's R7.
it wasn't quick.
2401 E7.
And that's
Or
State Board of
rule.
Education rule.
Yeah, so the whole rule
From the
committee is
1980s.
looking at R7 2401. That's kind of like our general charge. I'm looking specifically at E7. And again, I'm not saying that the TAS is wrong. I may haven't looked at it that specifically, but the two should meet. But I do know for a fact that the autism and SLD criteria do vary by state. So it's like the federal level is very broad. States have defined the all the way down. So I do know that, and again, those are always the two most controversial are those two, but I do know that there is room because Colorado had a state task force and dramatically updated their criteria and came up with a 60-page guide, and they've got templates and webinars and to provide consistency for parents and the field.
Hey, Rory and Sean, can I propose something? It's very vague, and then we can figure out how we make it sound fancier than this. Can imagine something that says we propose that there's a collaboration between ADE and their ASTAS documents and ensuring that it's in alignment with rules. And then if there needs to be adjustment, the rules to be in alignment, that be what the board does in that process to make sure there's alignment between the evaluation, ASTAS technical definitions and the rules in Board of Ed. But essentially, there's something tangible that I think we can all agree on is that there should be clarity between the guidance at the AD level. And I have where Marsha was coming from was where I was when I was a special educator. I'd go to the ASTAS document, look at the eval thing, look at the criteria, and maybe at least an initial step would get alignment between those two things.
I mean, I think what you're really talking about is a crosswalk between ASTAS and board rules to make sure that nothing is erroneous or missing.
Yep.
I think there's also room to potentially update.
Rules.
Yes, and I think that's a different thing.
Well, no, but I think that's why we're a subcommittee on evaluation.
Oh, I'm not
criteria.
negating that. I'm just saying I wouldn't muddy the two. I think you're talking about two different things. You're talking one about making sure that the technical assistance is accurate. Put that in a box. New box. Does the criteria in regulations regarding the does the assessment criteria for each independent disability category specified in Arizona regulations need to be considered and potentially revised? Like that may be something that you want to recommend separately, but I wouldn't conflate the alignment or the assessment of existing technical assistance with the need to think about whether or not you want to expand the assessment criteria in your state rules for a given disability category or all the categories. Does that make sense?
Seems like they have to go hand in hand though. So in other
Well,
words,
sure. I mean, like let's just say, let's say, take my box over here. You decide that you're going to recommend to the board and the board approves the need to, I'd suggest you bring together people, to do this, to update the assessment criteria. Because you have, under the E7 piece that you were talking about, you have some criteria in here, but they're pretty brief, right? Other states have full criteria listed. Sounds to me like ASTAS lists out a lot of the criteria. It's just not part of regs. So you have a decision to make whether or not you're going to essentially put the stuff from the ASTAS documents into regulations around the assessment criteria. If you do that, and you have this piece around making sure that the ASTAS information is aligned with rules, then sure, you need to make sure you're including that new information as well. But those two things could walk separately. You could have a crosswalk to existing rules, and then you could update the rules and make sure that those rules also align.
I like where you're headed because regardless if it's box A or box B, it's gonna, regardless if it's box A or box B, it's gonna be a public conversation with opportunities for stakeholders to weigh in on those definition and criteria. Because again, I think there's controversy over some. I'm not an expert, but just from what I hear. But either way, it's going to be a public debate at the board, which I think it's time to do. Because again, they haven't been updated in a couple decades. And there are actually some disabilities that aren't even listed in E7. So,
Member Pearson, did you have a comment or did you move?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the things though that we just need to be careful of is as we learn more about different disabilities, that the criteria and how they're diagnosed and how they are assessed changes. For example, a independent educational evaluator actually it talked about how he doesn't actually administer autism specific assessments anymore. And the psychological assessments that he administers does a better job of identifying whether or not autism exists versus somebody being incredibly gifted, because there can be some overlap between the two. And so I think, saying that we're going to take an ASTAS document and put it into rule, I think can be problematic as the field becomes more knowledgeable and better at identifying what specific disabilities are and how to tease those things out. So I just wanted to make that.
Let me restate what I was thinking, because I was just making sure that the ASTAS document and the rules weren't in conflict. And that was more my concern, because I share Member Pearson's concern that when we get very specific, we might make a perfect answer for one child, but a really not a great option for another child. And so there's this space to walk in. But I feel like there's a concern that there's a conflict between what's in rule and what's in ASTAS, because rule hasn't been adjusted in a long period of time.
yeah, thank you, Member Pearson. That's I was certainly not suggesting that the entire AZ TAS doc would go in rule. I always believe in that hierarchy, federal being very bold, state getting more fine, and all the way down it gets more fine tuned. So I share your concern.
It does seem logical, however, that all federal category, I guess it's odd because I don't know if the intent was that for some categories, the feds didn't do enough, we're going to add this additional criteria, but then some of them are just verification by qualified professional. It does seem messy, but maybe a recommendation for the State Board of Ed to review.
Yeah, they kind of get some technical guidance from ADE related to the ASTAS document, look for ways to provide clarity and ensure that they're not in conflict with.
I guess if needed, is the State Board of Education writing this out? Is that redundant with other laws that exist? I don't know. I don't know that legal aspect of it. So I guess I would throw in the as needed or if
and
needed.
I think that kind of gets where Member Pearson is. It's like, what's that Goldilocks space of having enough clarity without locking us into something, then all of a sudden we have to do something that's not in the good interest of a kid or a process, that because it's in rule, we have to do this. And it's interesting because usually I think of stuff starting from rules and going to technical assistance. And in this process, I almost see it the other way around. Let's make sure we have good technical assistance, and then what part of it needs to be in rules, not all of it, but some elements to have clarity and make sure there's no conflicts. Are we at a, I are we at a place where you could try to draft something that says, and do we take like a 10-minute break so you can take a crack at?
Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee, if you could give us 5 minutes, we will put together, a formal version of sort of what's been discussed, and we'll email it out to everybody. And then we'll have a chance to consider it and vote.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee, you have been emailed a document that contains the recommendations related to independent education evaluations and one left over from the morning discussion, which Melissa will also project on the screen in just a moment for your consideration for voting. Each member has been emailed this document.
You're gonna put it up. Gonna put it up.
Yeah.
Do you want to go to the IE guidance first, that tab? Those are separate. Do so.
You've not seen these yet.
That's in the language.
Right.
Hey, Sean, for the sake of my eyesight, can you read J1? Or my lack of eyesight?
Item J1, this is under guidance from ADE. The subcommittee recommends that ADE develop guidance to make clear what the required contents are for inclusion in an independent education evaluation for any given disability category, which PEAs could then use to develop guidance for parents.
So essentially, this is that idea of sort of a checklist, like what am I even supposed to have?
Yeah. And in some ways that somewhat exist. And so it might just be taking what's in the FAQs and adjusting around. It's not starting fresh, but is there any clarifying questions that we can discuss before I make a motion?
It's a moment to read them all.
Do you want to go ahead? Why don't we read J2? We'll go through from like a clarifying standpoint. We'll read them through and then we'll just like speed vote down.
Item J2, the subcommittee recommends that ADE develop guidance on available steps for districts when a parent brings an IEE obtained at private expense that does not meet the agency criteria. Item J3, ADE will evaluate the alignment between the ADE as-TAS documents and board rules regarding assessment criteria for special education determination for eligibility and provide a report to the board. Item J4, the subcommittee recommends that ADE and the State Board of Education solicit public comment from stakeholders regarding the need to expand assessment criteria for determining special education eligibility as currently iterated in board rule and determine changes to board rule if needed. The last item was left over from this morning. It was the giving parents the assessment data. A couple of members had recommended it be guidance instead. The subcommittee recommends AD provide technical assistance regarding the provision of draft evaluation reports to parents in advance of MET meetings, including the rationale for doing so and the scope and breadth of information that PEEs should provide.
So let's go back to J1. Is there any comments, questions related to J1? Member Kafikas.
I don't think they conflict, but it seems like a few of them overlap. Like if and when the board updates or realigns and potentially updates the evaluation criteria, it seems like that would be the same thing as the required content for inclusion for the IE for any given disability category. Isn't that the same? Potentially? Which is fine. I'm just clarifying.
Which two are you saying are the same?
Like J3 and J1, like the criteria for the IEE for any given disability category should also be what's in board rule and the TAS documents for the value. Doesn't matter if it's initial or independent.
They're slightly different. Member Kravikas, they're different enough in that the J1 focuses on IEEs, J3 is focused on the alignment between the as-TAS document and the board rule. So it's a sort of a broader one. I don't disagree that there's some crossover, but it's more incremental steps towards potential rule change.
Okay, I just want to be clear that, you know, what would, regardless if it's an independent or an initial, the criteria to be diagnosis of autism.
It's a criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, so, for example, if you have that clarification, I think the idea is that because it seems like there's an issue in your state with IEE providers meeting criteria, having something that's specific in that regard could help the field. So in some cases, you're going to have information that's available for everybody, but that J1 is particularly focused at getting the information to a target population that seems to need the information. Sort of like there's no harm, no foul to have it happening in multiple directions, I guess. Even if the information is the same, but tailored to different audiences.
Can I just lay something out there as the person, I have to leave at noon to
Okay.
pick up my child. I feel rushed.
Okay.
I don't, maybe I'm the only one. I don't feel that I can give this the consideration that was appropriate for a committee of this level in the next 5 minutes.
I agree, and I have to go at noon too.
So we have a hard stop at noon. We have 5 minutes. Maybe Director Ross and I think of discuss the next step, and whether it's a member Grace.
Yeah, I would just say, like, as we've been sitting here, I keep looking at the IEE page on ADE's website, and these questions are all addressed. And they're, but it's
formatting
to the level that they can, because again, at the end of the day, you have to file due process.
Yep.
And it over and over again says that. But it doesn't, there's not like here are the bulleted things that must be the criteria. It just says they must meet criteria. So I think it'd be worthwhile to look what's already there and then just figure out where's the not enough clarification. And we could build upon that.
Yeah, my version of that is it's there, and a lot of it's formatting, because it might be that becomes a brochure that takes what was an FAQ page on the website and becomes a PDF that you can hand to a provider.
I think it'd be pretty easy for like CEC or something to get some districts to submit their current process for, like, what is their current
examples
IE procedure look like, and their protocols and criteria and all that kind of stuff.
Dr. Hagerman, members of the subcommittee, we can look to schedule it at this point, probably a virtual meeting to close the loop, give members a chance to consider these recommendations. You've all been emailed them, and then a virtual meeting in which to discuss and vote.
Okay,
without opening new topics.
Yes, so just to close the loop on these items, and then the items on the legislative request.
Yes, and Rory and I will work out. We'll look for dates and send out a invite.
Perfect. That sounds great. So we will end before our hard stop of noon and meet that at least. Thank you guys so much.
Dr. Hickman, you do have to formally adjourn.
I formally adjourn. I guess saying I'm done wasn't quite enough, but